Hello， 大家好，欢迎大家今天下午抽空来参加这个莫腾的东南亚行业赋能报告的分享会。然后我们现在再稍微等一下，还有一些人正在排队陆续加入，我们稍后会开始我们这个整个的会议。我们这个是会有全程的这个会议是会有录像的，然后如果到时候大家对这个有需求的话，可以直接在我们的微信后台，包括还有在我们通过电子邮件可以跟我们发这个申请，我们到时候会把这个录像发给你们，然后包括一些可能还有一些没有读到我们那个报告的一些朋友，也可以在会后在后台留言，或者是发那个电子邮件给我们，我们可以把那个最近出的一些报告都发给你们。好了，我觉得现在17个 ，OK，我们暂时就先开始吧。我们先自我介绍一下啊，我是这次这个会议的一个主持人，因为我的这个背后的这个虚拟这个背景跟有点不一样，但是这不妨碍我还是我们公司的一员，所以就我们先介绍一下这个江干这边是我们的CEO，也是这一次的这个会议的一个主讲人之一。然后是我们来自智利的一个同事阿方手，这个报告基本上也是都是由他来制作的，所以说他也会作为一个主讲人之一。然后是我们的 COO 尤领，然后是我们就会也是协助这一次会议的一个我们的一个项目经理，这个叫内内，是来自印尼的同事。然后再稍微等一会儿，如果没有新的人加入的话，我们这个会就开始了，大概2分钟左右的样子。请大家再稍等一下，谢谢。好的，这一次会议可能算是一个比较小型的一个分享会，然后我们这一次的这个行业赋能报告呢，其实并没有太多的一个没有太多的一个一个比较主观的一个观点，然后基本上都是用一些数据在说实话为大家呈现一个东南亚每个国家这6个国家的一个真实的一个样貌，然后我们就暂时就先把那个话筒这边交给我们的今天主讲人之一我们 CEO 江干。
大家好。 关于墨腾，我觉得就不需要就是再做多少介绍，我觉得大家应该都还比较熟悉因为有很多人看我们的公众号，就是一直有一些朋友问我们说，哎，你们这个媒体做的怎么样？但是我也一直在跟朋友们说，其实我们不是做媒体的，然后我们等于说就是我们在东南亚一直在做一些就是我们自己做一些孵化的一些项目，然后今年年初的话，喂，听到吗？今年年初的话，我们正好把我们就是在印尼的一个就是主要的一个项目被国内的一家大公司收购了，然后新开始的项目因为疫情的关系，所以说时间上有一点延迟，所以我们就利用这个时间做了一些对市场的一些整体的一些分析，整体的一些理解，嗯。怎么说呢？就是我觉得从2016年，阿里巴巴到东南亚来收购拉 a 达之后，就是国内对东南亚这个市场的关注开始比较多了。然后对于我们来说的话，就是我们其实也一直都在东南亚，所以也感觉到就是市场的热度从16年、17年、18年到19年上半年就一直在提高。然后1、2个月之前，我们也做了一个分享，就是看整个市场，不管是就是投资啊，还是说企业的进入啊，这边一直是有一个热度。然后今年呢受到疫情的关系，比较有意思的是，我们看到就是对这个市场的关注还是在增加的过程中。这个我不知道，这我觉得可能是跟最近印度市场啊，也包括就是美国市场啊，就是出现了一些波折，可能也有一些关系。但是整体上的话，东南亚的市场受到的关注还是挺多的，嗯，然后我们就发现，就是市场上的话，就是有结构性的资料其实比较少，然后我也跟国内的一些投资人、跟一些券商的朋友一起，就是看过一些公司，看过一些报告，整体感觉的话，就是呃，怎么讲呢，都会各种程度上从一些主观的角度去把一个市场讲得太好，或者说把这个市场讲得太不好，然后从我们的角度来讲的话，我们是想给大家呈现一个相对来说比较客观的这个市场的一个状况，然后呃到底是在各个领域它的基础设施、它的连接度，它的人才的储备等等等等，这到底是一个什么样的状况？我相信在座的可能有一些就看过那个谷歌跟大马西的一些报告，就是一片大好，然后所有的东西都在高速增长，但是这个是不是反映的一个真实的情况？然后就是这个过程中，嗯，到底的机会在哪里？然后这个里面有哪些坑？所以这个也是我们一直今年在调研的一些内容。然后今年我们也陆陆续续的就是发布了一些报告，包括东南亚上半年的投资情况，包括东南亚的就是二手车市场，包括我们今天提到的那个就是东南亚行业赋能报告，也包括就是我们最近应该快要出版的一个呃呃东南亚外卖市场的一个整体的一个情况，因为最近就是大家在整个市场上对美团啊或者对东南亚的 Grab 跟 Gojek都有一个相当大的关注，所以我们也会就是不定期的，就是对跟大家进行一些简单的分享，然后我们希望今天呢就是能够能够比较多的互动嘛，就是如果大家有什么问题的话，可以随时在那个不管是说通过语音的方式直接打开您的麦克，就是来提一些问题，或者说在下面呢就是那个chat box 那个就是留言区直接直接打入您的问题，或者需要讨论的一些点。那我们就是希望就是今天这个活动能够对大家有些帮助。嗯，我这里介绍一下我这个同事 Alfonso，就是他是在整个市场，其实嗯做了很多年的市场的研究，然后对市场的就是整体的一些基础要素会有一些比较深的理解。 那我们的这个就是行业赋能报告呢，我们是希望就是把东南亚一些最基础的行业的东西能够整理起来做一个连接的分析。当然啦，就是这个里面很多时候也不一定是100%的完全正确，因为市场上的数据还是会有一些缺失。这个里面我们也欢迎大家就是对一些事情如果有些不同的理解、不同的见解的话，我们可以随时丢到这个留言区来讨论。然后因为Alfonso 他会用英文发言，所以说这个里面就可能我帮大家来做一些翻译。如果大家有什么问题的话中英问题都可以。So Alfonso, I was just making a simple introduction of what we have been doing this year, and also, I mean, the rationale behind why we're doing this report. I'm going to pass the stage to you to explain about certain key findings and key observations and analysis for the market, and I will be helping you with the translation because most of the audience who are Chinese speaking, but I suspect that some of them would be able to understand English without any problem.
Okay, yeah, so let me share my screen. Thank you for the introduction, Yangan. Let me know when you can see. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the purpose of this report was to basically make sense of the business environment in Southeast Asia. And well, there is a lot of information. There is macroeconomic information, there is microeconomic information. We have company information, investment information, and well, it's very difficult to make sense of that data with some sort of a strong narrative behind. And basically, the aim of the report is to create that narrative to be able to put together all of those aspects.
所以我们看东南亚的时候，就会发现市场上有很多的信息，很多的数据，包括一些宏观的信息，包括一些微观的信息，然后也有很多就是关于就是单独企业或者单独行业的一些信息。然后我们这边就是做呢，就是把这些信息进行一个连接，一个系统性的分析。Back to you, Alfonso.
Thank you. So as you can see in the screen, basically what we're trying to do is to make sense of what are the main the determinants of infrastructure, connectivity, and human capital. And you may ask yourself, what is this? Basically, infrastructure is basically the buildings, the machinery, the assets, the physical things that basically are present in an economy or in a country. The human capital is basically an attribute, or basically are the different attributes that relates to the population itself. So it can be related to the education, the skills, the possession, the income, well, different things related to the population. And we have another dimension that is also called connectivity, that basically represents how connected a country is with, well, with their neighbors, with the rest of the world. And this is not only at the country level, also what's going on within the country. So what we're trying to do is to make sense of these dimensions.
所以这个里边就是我们总结出来就是3个主要的就是点，然后包括就是基础设施。我觉得基础设施这个东西大家相对来说应该会比较熟悉，包括一些就是物理的，包括一些就是虚拟的一些基础设施，包括电信等等。然后呢，还有一个就是人力资本，这个里面包括了就是各个国家的就是人的受教育程度啊，也包括一些就是收入水平啊，这些就是其实在东南亚不管是投资或者创业的话，这个其实都是息息相关的。你能够有什么样的员工，你能够有什么样的客户。然后第3点呢，就是这点可能要重点提一下，就是整个行业的互联互通。这个包括一些就是信息的互联互通，包括一些就是服务，也包括一些产品，包括就是国内跟国际的一些贸易。然后我们希望就是这些点能够给大家一个就是这个市场一个比较直观、比较一个系统的一个感知。 Positive, yeah.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, there are three main dimensions: infrastructure, connectivity, and human capital. And for example, the main factor behind human capital is basically the state of the population, okay? The main factor that affects the connectivity of a region, basically the connectivity impacts directly the competitiveness of the country itself, is basically the geography. So if you have an isolated country or an isolated city, it's going to have a very low rate of connectivity itself. And what mostly impacts the infrastructure is actually the amount of natural resources. And we're going to go deeper into those in the following sections.
这里面有几个就是值得提出一下，就是在人类资本这一块，其实有一个很大的因素，就是各个国家的人口。然后相信这个作为一个就是比较底层的一个对市场分析的数据，这个大家也相对来说比较熟悉。然后在那个就是连接的这一块，相信大家应该也看到过，就是关于东南亚市场的一些分析，比如包括什么群岛国家，什么就是多山啊，什么东西，地理因素其实对整个这些国家的，不管是消费者的分布还是什么东西，都会有些影响。这个方面我们也会进行一些分析。然后还有一点的话，就是提出的话，就是，可能是在那个就是基础设施这一块的话，有一个因素是这个国家的，就各个国家的一些自然资源。然后这个东西的话，就是尤其是在技术跟互联网的分析的时候，可能提出的不是特别多，但是这个其实对这些方面都会有一些影响啊。然后这个我们也等下也会重点提一下。
And the final aspect that basically influence everything is basically the regulations itself. So you can think in the regulations you can think in the basically the regulations influence the flow of resources. So if we compare this to a river, basically the regulations basically determine the flow of water that is going to pass through that river. So, so for example, countries that basically are making the restriction more, that are decreasing the amount of restrictions, they're going to increase basically the level of flow of resources. So this is also something that is very important that we're going to cover in the next section. So this is just an outline of what we're going to see.
然后还有一点，可能等一下我们会重点提出的话，是关于就是各个国家的一些监管跟政策。然后这个的话，我们可以把它比喻成一个基础设施，一个就是类似于水利工程一样的基础设施。然后它能够控制到就是资源的整体的，就是比如说把资源比喻成一条大河的话，就是资源怎么去流转，有多少资源能够顺利的流向什么样的方向，那整个就是监管啊，包括政策，这些就可能是跟一条就是河上面的水坝或者水利设施一样。当然了，就这些就是我们刚才提到的，都是我们现在的一些基本上的就是大纲。然后等一下我们会把一些具体的信息再跟大家分享一下。
Thank you. So we talked briefly about the connectivity itself. So basically what we're trying to understand is why the levels of development in Southeast Asia, specifically the levels of infrastructure and connectivity or competitiveness, are actually very low. So here you will see this map that is actually depicting the level of population density in different areas of the region. And I think that one of the most important aspects is that it is very concentrated in just a few cities. So if you see, there are not so many like red dots among the region. So you will have like the main cities that are basically the mega cities, and which concentrate usually like more than 50% of the population. So this is also very important. So what do I mean by this is that we have around 50% of the population is still living in rural areas. And basically this is an aspect that is related to the connectivity itself. Basically, there are many things that we can actually, things could have been very different if the development of cities could have been a bit different. We will see a bit more in the next slide. Maybe you want to translate that.
Yeah, of course, no problem. 所以这张图其实是我们对东南亚的人口分布做出的一个就是怎么讲呢？一个比较可视化的一个呈现。然后你可以注意到的话，就是上面有几个非常大的点，就是说在东南亚的每个国家都会有一个或者几个或者少数几个区域人口非常集中特大的城市。然后如果我们看数据的话，就是一半就城市化率在整个东南亚区域的话是大概是50%左右，所以说还有一半左右的人生活在农村。但是城市的话就是非常非常集中，基本上每个国家可能都会有这样几个就是特别大的城市。然后这个图的影响就是这些城市会集中大量的资源，然后这些城市也可能是很多商业模式主要分布的一些地方。然后我这边我自己就加一句，就是说这个可能跟中国有一点就是很不同的地方，就是你会发现中国的图的话，这当然等一下可能也会有一些比较具体的，就是你会发现东南亚的城市特大城市每个国家都有，但是整体的数量其实并不是特别多。你看就是在比如说泰国啊，你看越南，在几个大的就是红点之外，其实人口分布其实还是比较散的。Alfonso, over to you.
So if we compare Southeast Asia with other regions such as China and Europe and also the US, you will see that cities, basically sizable cities, are somehow evenly distributed. So this will impact basically the level of interaction that these cities have between each other. So this level of interaction basically impacts immediately the amount of commerce that is going to basically happen between them. And it's also going to impact immediately the infrastructure, because if you have a lot of cities that are actually very connected, you are gonna, and basically you move a lot of resources through that area, you're gonna also, like countries are also going to invest in infrastructure in order to make that happen in a more smooth way. So this is also one aspect that in Southeast Asia is lacking, that other regions such as China, Europe, and the US, basically that they have. And this is why things are very different.
这里面就是我们对就是大家刚才看到了就东南亚的人口分布的这样的一个热力图，然后这边的话就我们把它跟欧洲、跟中国、跟美国东部以及就是南亚进行这样的一个比较你会这里比较重要的一个点就是说城市的分布，或者说会有一个城市群的概念，会影响很多东西，会影响整个贸易的流转，会影响就整个基础设施的建设，也会影响就整个国家这个商业的一个设置。你会发现的话，就是在中国、美国、欧洲甚至一定程度上印度，你会发现会有一些人口密度比较高的城市群。那这样的一个东西，在东南亚大部分地方其实是不存在的。所以说这个对整个基础设施，整个怎么讲呢？就是城市之间连接的这样一个架构，或者说对之后就是怎么去分布这些商业或者投资这样的一个东西，会有很大的影响。
Yeah, so one of the most obvious explanations is due to natural causes. It's basically why there is a lack of connectivity, or why there is some sort of not an even distribution of cities in the region, and is due to the particular geography. So you will see things like this is just a map that is showing the amount of rainforest that exists in Southeast Asia. And you will see that, for example, in a country like Malaysia or also in Indonesia, you will have basically a large portion of the country basically that have heavy forests. And you will see also, like, for example, in a country like Thailand, that they have more more flat areas, more plain. You will see that actually they are able to develop this kind of network of cities in a more successful way. And this is actually one of the main reasons of why there is some sort of lack of connectivity that is happening in the region, basically geographical factors.
这里面值得提出的话就是说，一个地理的因素。然后这张图的话是东南亚的森林的分布，然后森林的分布的话，大家也知道，就是很多程度上跟山区的就是山的分布这个也是密切相关的。然后你会看到，就是像马来西亚跟印尼这两个国家的话，其实还是有大量的山跟树林。然后这样的话，就是把一个国家就是其实地理上其实还是分割的蛮厉害的。这些会对就是贸易也会对就是说城市之间的互联互通会有一个很大的影响。然后这个里面我们可能就是比较值得指出的是，不知道大家在地图上能不能看得清楚，就是泰国中部那一块，就是曼谷跟曼谷周边其实是一个平原地带。平原地带的话，其实在曼谷它会形成了一个都市群，还有包括曼谷周边的一些城市。然后在这个方面的话，就是它的城市之间的互联互通，它的就是整个这个基础设施的网络会跟其他国家有一些不太一样。Alfonso, over to you.
So how we connect this with the level of development of a country, and the main way to connect this is basically as the geographical factors and the lack of connectivity basically influence the type of city that is going to emerge. So if you see here in this map also, you will see that the percentage of urban population is going to be very low. So in average in Southeast Asia, it's actually around 50%, and that is actually one of the lowest in the global comparison. You can see here Southeast Asia, and after that you will see Africa just below. So how urban population or how cities basically are connected with the infrastructure is because basically cities are related to obviously the industrial development. So there you have a super easy and obvious connection.
右上角大家可以看到，就是我们对不同区域的城市化率进行了一个比较。然后你看到北美、拉美、欧洲跟整个亚洲的话，就是其实比例都会比东南亚稍微高一点。然后东南亚并不比就是非洲高很多。那就是城市化的水平，这个大家也应该知道，就是对整个国家就是它的整个商业跟工业的发展，本身是一个就是相关度非常高的。Over to you.
So this slide tends to be a bit more complex, but the idea behind this is that as the geography and the development of cities has basically hindered the creation of industrial development, basically you will have a large portion of countries basically dedicated to do things related to agriculture. And while this is not something bad itself, it is basically, if you compare like different countries, for example, here we don't have Singapore here because basically most of the GDP comes from services and comes from basically more sophisticated ways of creating of creating value. So you will see that a country like Vietnam, they have a large portion of the value added, of the gross value added, that comes directly from agriculture, and you will see the same thing about Indonesia. So you can see how things are connected. You can see how basically having like 50% of the people living in rural areas is directly is directly related with how the economy of the country produces basically the gross value added. So basically, most of it comes from agriculture, fishing, and mining and quarrying. So that is actually quite high, especially in Vietnam and Indonesia.
所以这张图的话，就大家可以看到，就是一些东南亚包括农业，还有一些自然资源的分布。然后这些分布的话，其实会对整个国家的这个业态的发展会有一些影响啊。就比如说你在这张图上，你基本上是看不到新加坡的，因为本身它缺乏自然资源，所以它必然会走上一条往一些高附加值的产业发展的一个道路。然后你会发现，就是在这边，在越南的话，其实农业对在整个经济的占比还是相对来说比较高的。然后这些就决定了，就是说很多东西，就包括就是人的就业也好，包括也就是说就是它的整个行业的产出，包括就是整个国家的经济。这个里面的话，就是你会发现，就是越南跟印尼这两个国家在农业这块可能就是产出会比较多一点。然后这个里面的话，就是我插一句，可能也会带来一些就是特定的机会。如果大家看东南亚的传统项目，你会发现，就是最近1-2年，印尼关于农业的项目其实是相对来说不算少的。
Okay, and now moving on to the next section, basically that is about regulations. I just want to highlight two main things. Is that regulations change very dramatically during the last 60 years, especially in a country like Singapore, for example. All of these changes began maybe in the 60s, and basically in the rest of the country, it began later. So the regulations basically were much more pro-liberalization policies. And you can see that in the different countries, basically, or if you see, like in most of the cases, the different dimensions that we have selecting have been improving. So you will see that that regulations that relate to the development of infrastructure are improving. You will see that the regulations that relate to the connectivity itself are improving. And for example, what is a regulation related to connectivity? It could be a regulation that basically will decrease the tariffs of different imports and exports with other countries. That is an example of a deregulation of a connectivity measure, if we can say that. And also about human capital, you will see that obviously the governments of Southeast Asia, they have been doing a great effort to improve the levels of human capital. Basically, you will see that in terms of education and, well, obviously health-related regulations. So everything has been improving, but the important thing to mention is that this has happened in a very short amount of time, maybe about 20 years in the rest of the countries, and in Singapore, maybe about 60 years. So it is actually very new.
所以这个章节的话，我们就是重点分析的是，就是在制度跟监管这个方面，对整个东南亚的经济的影响。然后整体上会发现，就是在整个制度跟 regulation 的这个角度来讲的话，是处于一个逐渐放松。逐渐就是去规则的这样的一个状态。然后可能就是新加坡起步会比较早，可能从1960年代就开始对一些就制度上的东西进行一些放松。然后其他国家的呢，它的起步可能会相对比较晚一点。然后就是很多东西就是在过去的15到20年之间发生的。然后这些不同的制度、不同的法规都会对就包括基础设施，包括互联互通，包括就是它的就是整个人力资本、教育、医疗这些都会就政府的政策跟这些法规都会有一些相对来说比较深刻的影响。然后我们也在这边发现就是有 在各种就在主要的国家的话，其实它的整体的法规是往一个好的一个更放松的方向发展的。但是这个就是起点是比较晚，所以说很多时候还没有到一个就是完全的一个地步。
Thank you. I think that this is something interesting to consider, but one of the aspects that have also been improving in the region is related to the corruption level. So basically, countries have been trying to improve the levels of, well, have been trying to decrease the level of corruption, and I think it's interesting to notice that if you put like all the countries in a chart, and you will compare that with the level of infrastructure, you will see that there is a clear relationship between the corruption perception in those countries and the level of infrastructure. So you will see that, for example, in Singapore, the level of corruption, well, this is actually in the scale 10 is less corrupted. So in a country with very low levels of corruption, you will see that the level of infrastructure is very high. But in other countries, so for example, this one, I don't know which one it is actually, you will see that with a high level of corruption, basically this will hinder immediately the level of infrastructure and investment. So I think that this is something very interesting to consider, that most of the countries in Southeast Asia are in a mid-ground in terms of the development.
这张图的话，就是我觉得可能国内并没有看到一个是非常仔细的分析，就是各个国家的就是连接程度跟它的就是整个就是基础设施的发展程度的一个相关性。然后我们在这边可以看到，就是除了一些极个别的就是例子之外，就大部分国家的就是它的整体的连接程度跟它的就基础设施的发展是强相关的。然后你会看到右上角，就是新加坡作为一个非常青年的国家，然后它的整个基础设施的发展也是在远超过其他国家的。然后整体上的话，东南亚在就是全世界的话，就它的连接程度是处于一个中等水平。Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. So in this section, in the next section, basically we talk about the modernization of Southeast Asia. Modernization is similar to talk about the industrialization of the region. So why and how the region has developed in this last 30 years. So you will see in this chart again that we are talking about the three dimensions that we talked in the first slide. So we're going to talk about infrastructure, connectivity, and human capital. So we basically merge different kind of variables to have a good understanding of the infrastructure, and we did the same about the connectivity and the human capital. And after that, we put everything in the chart. Maybe you want to explain that kind of brief explanation before moving to the next.
所以刚才提到一些很基础的东西，然后现在的话，我们就是来看一下这东南亚这各个国家在现代化的这个过程中，现在处于的一个地位跟过去30年发生的一些变化。然后这个里面的一些就是各种数据、各种因素，我们也分成就是3块，就是我们刚才提到基础设施、互联互通跟人力资本分成这3块进行了一个比较系统的分析跟连接。
Thank you. So, for example, if you see a country like Vietnam and you check the infrastructure that is basically depicted by this small factory icon, you will see that basically that the employment in industry and services moved from 30% in the year 1991 to 63% in 2019, and that is an impressive growth. So it's like 30%, 30 absolute points of growth during these 30 years. So you can imagine how different things were about 30 years ago. So basically you had 70% of people working in agriculture, and now basically that is working in something completely different. And obviously this affects things such as the such as the average household income, basically from working from agriculture. Now you have a very different disposable income.
所以这个里面可能就是指出了一下是比如说像越南在1991年，也就是越南革新开放的前一年，当时它的整个第二、第三产业吸收了全国大概30%的就业，然后就是29年过去了，然后到2019年的话，它的整个就第二、第三产业的话是吸收了整个全国63%的就业，然后这整个就是工业化的话，不只是影响了人口的分布，还有一个很重要的就是对作为消费者来说的话，他的家庭的收入跟他的可支配收入这个方面的影响是非常大的。也就是说，就是除了他本身收入的增长之外，在过去的20多年中，就是越南从农业中解放了就是整整1倍的人。
Yeah, so in the rest of the cases, they have also been, everything has been improving. So for example, if you check connectivity, that it is measured by measuring the trade per capita. Basically, the trade per capita is a measure of imports plus exports. Per capita, you will see that also the levels of connectivity has also been improving. So also that is something very positive, because it implies that the countries are much more connected, the flow of resources, not only physical resources, you can think also in terms of interaction with people. Now we have people that is talking between each other, that is basically finding business opportunities. And with that in mind, all of those products can actually be moving around in order to make the business happen. So also that is very positive.
还有一个因素，在过去的就是几十年中发展很快的，就是它的这个指标叫就是怎么讲呢？人均贸易，也就是说每个国家的就是出口额跟进口额的总和，然后除以这个国家的就是人口，然后我们发现这个方面的增长呢，就带来几个东西，不仅仅是就是贸易本身，就是货物的这个流转，还有一个就是在这个过程中促进了人与人之间的交流跟这些信息的流转，所以这个方面是整个就是我们刚才提到的就是互联互通这个里面就其实蛮重要的一个因素。
Janggan and Alfonso, right? Can I stop you there? There's actually a question from Roy. So I thought it would be a good time to just address that question, since I think it's quite relevant to the current topic they're talking about. 你可以看一下那个什么 Zoom Group Chat 那边看一下。
OK， 开拓东南亚大市场过程中，面对区域中跨境贸易物流的困难和语言不统一的挑战，有什么好的思路跟成功经验分享？ I think the question is that when we are exploring the market in Southeast Asia, so a challenge is that I mean, the number of different countries, right? I mean, the cross-border sort of flow of merchandise, as well as the sort of inconsistency or disparity of languages, and what's the general thought into this, and also any like specific success examples for that. You want to take a step on this?
I didn't get the question very. Can you repeat the question?
So in exploring Southeast Asia market, we are facing the issue of the multiple countries.
Okay.
The flow of goods, it's challenging, and also the languages are different. So what's the sense of sort of addressing this issue when you are actually operating in multiple countries, when you are exploring Southeast Asia as a big market?
Right. Well, there is only one solution, right? And the solution is to have a very knowledgeable local team in order to address those issues. And as maybe you have read in different articles, and maybe maybe this is just common knowledge, is that many companies have tried to enter Southeast Asia and they have failed because they don't know how to address the challenges of the different countries in a nice way. So it is important to be able to connect to the local environment nicely and to be able to translate the different needs of one country to the other one. Because you may think that, okay, Southeast Asia, you may consider them like as a pack, but the thing is that things are very different between each other, and that is also part of the challenge. So you need to have local people in order to address that, or knowledgeable people that is, maybe it's not local, but that is going to be able to know how to deal with that. So for example, I mentioned before an aspect that is related to corruption. And for example, corruption is very interesting because, for example, if a company from the Western side of the world comes to Southeast Asia, maybe they're going to face this kind of corruption, and maybe they're not going to know how to deal with this. But maybe someone from Asia that is actually a bit more used to this, they will know how to tackle this. So this is the kind of things that you need to know in order to do business here. And yeah, so I suppose that local knowledge is one of those things, right? And the other thing is that it depends on the business, right? So some businesses will require much more resources in order to do it. But what I have seen before is that, for example, let's say that a company is able to get a lot of investment, a lot of funding. In many cases, instead of just trying to understand the market or their particular country in a very nice, consistent way, instead of that, they diversify in all of the countries in order to try to find some sort of jackpot or something like that, and that is not going to work. The only way to work is to basically to do things right in one country, and after that to move to the other one in order to be developing the market nicely instead of just jumping from one thing to the other one, because that is not going to work. That basically shows weaknesses, shows that you don't know what's going on in the region. And also in many cases, people like companies will begin hiring thousands of people. And basically that is also another sign of weaknesses, because you can actually achieve the same kind of efficiency with much less, with less people. So there are many things that that question can be answered in many different ways, but yeah, that's what I have to say.
这里我翻译一下，可能也会有加一点我自己的理解，就是问题是说在东南亚的就是跨境的这个问题跟语言不同一点，也就是说市场分割，每个市场不同的这样一个问题。首先一个很基本的就是说，就是这个当然了，就是所有人都在讲嘛，本地化，就是你需要有本地的知识，你需要有本地的怎样。但是这个里面的话，我觉得就是核心的话，其实是一个你需要有能够信任的或者是本地的人，或者是说对本地的一些就做事方式、一些市场情况就非常了解的人。然后这个东西呢，就是怎么去做就打个比方，就比如说Alphonse刚才提到了，就是每个国家在这个就是连接程度跟腐败这一块就是其实不太一样，都会有一些自己的一些相关的规则，也会有一些就是你怎么样在一个合规的方式去应对的做法。然后这个里面我也是看到过很多中国公司在这个方面其实会有一些想当然的方式，或者说会太过相信进入这些国家见到的可能是第一个认识的，就是相对来说比较看起来比较靠谱的本地人，所以说这个方面会吃很多亏，所以这样就怎么样找到一些就是靠谱的，然后有足够的本地知识的一些，就是不管是团队也好，不管是合作伙伴也好，这个还是一个非常非常重要的一个东西。然后这些东西就我们看过很多是西方公司在东南亚做的，然后包括一些日本公司，很多公司在那边做了就几十年了，然后这个过程中就早期的时候也是踏了很多的坑，但是在这个就是慢慢过程中，他们摸索到一套就是怎么在这个就是在不同的国家进行一些就是怎么说呢？就是不同的业务怎么样，就是绕过或者说就是应对一些本地特色的挑战跟问题。 这个的话，其实现在的好处就是说，现在整体市场上的信息还是比20年前、30年前要多很多，获取信息的渠道也多很多。也就是说，这个不会像当年一样，就是说很多东西都需要你自己去摸索、自己去踏分。包括当年比如说一些西方的一些做快销的公司进入东南亚的时候怎么去做，然后现在都会有很多的经验和都会有很多东西。所以对很多公司来说，就是怎么样去规划，怎么样去摸索出一些就是比如说靠谱的本地团队或者本地合作伙伴的话，这个其实并没有10多年前、20年前那么难。然后还有一点的话，就是急功近利，就是想很快的同时在各个国家铺开，然后同时一下子就是雇佣很多的人去干这件事情。这个我们看的还挺普遍的，就包括一些东南亚的包括一些创业公司在往就是其他国家发展的时候，都会犯这样子的错误，因为心里着急嘛。但是很多时候的话，就是太急的话，反而跑不快。这个是我觉得看到很多公司之后，还是一个比较深的体验跟感悟。Sorry, I just added quite a bit of sort of
Yeah,
personal
that's
perspective.
that's good. Thank you.
I think
So
yeah.
there are more questions, or
Or
should we continue just to not break the flow?
yeah, let's continue.
Okay, yeah. So this is gonna be faster. So we mentioned briefly in this slide that things are improving in the 3 dimensions that we mentioned. So the question is, things are growing fast, but the thing is this enough? That is the next question. Is this enough to be able to create very sophisticated products in the region? Maybe you want to translate that directly. It's easy.
我们刚才提到的就是在过去的过去的一段时间，就东南亚就在整体上，就是包括就是基础设施，包括就是人力资本，包括就是其他一些方面都会有一些很快的就是发展，都有一些很快的发展。那我们现在就是要问的一个问题就是，发展程度是不是足够来提供一些相对来说比较复杂、比较精密的一些就是产品跟服务。那我们现在到底是处于一个什么样的阶段？这个是我们接下来需要就是想就是跟大家分享的一个主要的一个点。
Thank you. So if you see in this chart, you're going to see a relationship between the industrial development. Basically, this is this is measured by using the gross fixed capital formation per capita and also the disposable income per household. And you can see basically that there is a direct relationship between those 2 variables. So why this is important? Because it is showing you in a very quick way what is actually the level of development of those different countries in terms of the level of infrastructure, obviously, and the disposable income. And even if things are growing fast, it doesn't mean that it's enough. Because, for example, you can see that in a country like Vietnam, for example, the average, the median disposable income is around like $500 or something like that. And in Indonesia, it's like 650. But in Singapore, it's like $6,000. So there are quite a big differences there. So if you are thinking in creating some sort of business that is going to offer very sophisticated digital products or something like that, you may want to think in that, because the population tends to be the population doesn't have enough. The median disposable income is not high enough to move towards the digital services era or age or something like that.
所以就像刚才提到的，就是说在我们看到了快速的发展，然后这快速的发展的话，它到底是一个什么样的水平？然后这张图的话，其实是就是每个国家的工业发展程度跟它的就是家庭可支配收入的这样的一个相关图，大家可以看到就是相关性还是很明显的。所以你看到每个国家它的就是就家庭的可支配收入是一个 什么样的水平，这样就决定了就是说它的消费能力能够支撑什么样的东西。我们觉得就是说这个指标可能比每个国家的人均 GDP 对我们就是产品或者是说商业的一个规划，可能更有一个直接的就是影响。
And you may say, yeah, but there is also a matter of prices. Maybe the prices are different in different countries, and that is a fair point. But the thing is that in this chart here, basically what we can see is that the level of possession of different kind of products is actually different. So obviously you will see that in a country like Singapore that has a very high disposable income, you will see that the possession of different kind of goods is very high, while in other countries like Indonesia or Philippines or something like that, the possession tends to be lower. So you may want to, like when thinking in your product or when thinking in your company, you may want to think in this, because there are many things that are missing in those countries that for someone living in a developed country may consider as a basic. So this is another aspect that is very interesting. It's basically the relationship of obviously the level of infrastructure, the level of disposable income, and obviously the possession of the possession of durable and digital devices.
这个里面可能有人要提出的是，我们刚才提到就是家庭的可支配收入。那一个这样的问题就是说，家庭的可支配收入会不会就是跟每个国家它的就是物价的不同会有关系？当然了，就是这样的话，就这张图可能就会给一个比较一个直观的认识。这是每个国家的就是各种设备的怎么讲呢？渗透率就包括一些最基本的什么电视啊、冰箱啊、移动电话啊，就是电脑啊、空调啊，包括吸尘器这些设备。这个图会给你一个就是直观的感觉，就是每个国家它对这些设备的就是普及度，然后很可能一些我们认为习以为常的一些东西，在一些国家可能就是普及度很低。然后这个普及度很低的话，就是我加一句到底是意味着是有机会呢，还是说这个国家在这个领域有一些接受度，还是什么其他方面的问题呢？这个我们觉得需要就是具体的问题具体去分析啊。但是这个会给你一个比较好的怎么讲呢指标，然后让你看到就是说各个国家它的这个作为一个家庭为一个单位，它的各项就是发展程度是什么样子的。Back to you.
Thank you. So I'm gonna skip to the next section that is basically focusing logistics. So we already showed this this map that is basically showing the population density and all that. And why this is important, because the way that cities are distributed is actually very related again with how connected cities are. So one of the ways to see a representation, a material representation of the connectivity dimension that we have mentioned before is through roads, is through trade routes, is through trade routes, is through airports. Is basically, that is one way to see this. So basically, why we're showing this map again is because this kind of distribution of cities and actually the development of the 3 dimensions are actually moving together nicely, okay? But the level of logistics is also affected by the things that we mentioned before. So as you can see, things in this case are not improving so much. You have countries like Indonesia that things are actually improving. In other countries, things are basically a bit more constant. And for example, in the case of Vietnam, things are actually improving, and that is very nice. In Philippines too. But yeah, it is not so dramatic as before. Maybe it is actually related because there are so many geographical aspects that are basically hindering the development of roads and all that, that is actually putting some sort of difficulty to continue improving this. And also the final thing is that the logistic efficiency should always be increasing when the other 3 dimensions are actually increasing at the same time. So those things move together. So you will have the infrastructure, the human capital, and the connectivity. So when those 3 things move together, you will see that the logistic efficiency will also improve. So things move a bit slower, but I have actually increased during the last years. And actually these charts are actually covering a shorter time period. So you are not going to be able to see the same kind of increases through the 30 years that we covered before.
这个地图，就是这张热力图，大家刚才已经看到了，就是这其实是东南亚的人口的分布。然后这里我们要谈的是说它的整个一个物理的基础设施跟它的就是物流的这个效率，包括道路，包括机场，包括就是一些主要的贸易路径。然后这个里面我们可以看到的呢，就是说，这跟就是这城市的分布其实也是密切相关的。然后我们看到就是，如果把时间线缩短的话，其实它的整个的进步的速度并不是特别的快。然后为什么这个指标比较重要呢？就是说它整个物流的这个效率其实是跟我们提到的3点呢，就是主要的分析的指标，包括它的基础设施，包括它的就是互联互通和那个人力资本，这几个其实是挺相关的。它会跟着这3个点的就是进步一起进步，是一个需要有强相关性的。所以说这个方面的话，我们看到就是最近几年有一些进步，但是我们觉得就进步的速度可能并不是特别的快。
Thank you. And obviously, when you compare something like, if you ask yourself, what is the output of having a better logistics? Obviously, the output should be a higher level of merchandise. And basically, this is what this graph is showing. It's basically showing some sort of direct relationship between the merchandise trade and actually the logistic performance index that we're using in the x-axis. So you can see that there is obviously a relationship that is very positive, and you can see that the countries of Southeast Asia are somehow like between in the mid ground, but also in the low ground. So things can actually can improve a lot with with the further development of the regions, and also with more pro-liberalization policies to improve this. Yeah.
所以这个里面我们看到的就是说它的整个物流效率跟它的就是物品贸易的一个相关性。这里面我觉得一个可能的解读就是说，它物流的基础设施其实某种程度上限制了它的贸易的发展。然后我们可以看到，就是在这个相关性图上，大部分的东南亚国家还是处于一个中等或者中等偏低的一个水平。然后这个的话就是这里面会涉及到一些就是比如说就提升物流，能够给整体的它的一个商业社会跟整体的贸易整体的这些提升会有一个很强的关系。
Thank you. Let me see. So we try to separate our understanding of what is actually the logistic efficiency, and basically we divided the logistic quality of the quality of the ports, the airports, and the roads. And actually the quality is actually quite high in Southeast Asia, so that is nice. But one of the things that was actually lacking in Southeast Asia is, again, the connectivity. So basically you will have like maybe not so many ports, maybe not so many airports, maybe lacking roads to connect cities. So this is something that it needs further improvement. So it's not the quality of the things itself, it's actually the lack of them that is missing in Southeast Asia.
这张图就是其实我们也是分析了比较多的数据，然后这里面可以看到的是整个东南亚就是它的道路跟它的就是机场的质量还是可以的。然后就是问题并不在于就是说路况差、质量差，而是说没有足够的就是城市之间的 道路的连接，也就是说，就是基础设施并不是一个质量的问题，而是一个就是数量的问题。那这个数量其实是限制进一步发展的一个比较重要的一个因素。Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so moving on to the next section that is actually related to the telecommunication infrastructure. So what do we mean by telecommunication infrastructure? So here again, we're using this kind of map in order to try to understand what is the level of telecommunication and technology infrastructure in the region. Okay, so we can use like different kind of measures in order to do that. So for example, how do we measure the infrastructure of that? So what we chose to use in that case is basically the capital investment in telecommunication per capita. So that is actually a very nice metric to use to assess the level of infrastructure. And in the case of connectivity, is the percentage of population using the internet. In the case of the human capital, is basically the percentage of households that possess a smartphone, for example. That is basically the possession, is the percentage of the population that possesses smartphones. So that is actually very clear. Maybe you want to explain that introduction. Yeah.
所以这个里面这个区域里面我分析的就是说东南亚就作为一个电信基础设施的一个发展程度。然后这里面我们也把它分成3块来分析。第一个就是它的那个就是就是从基础设施的角度来讲的话，就是这里面我们是用的指标是说在电信方面的就是人均基础设备的投资，然后在那个就是在连接方面的话，我们就是看就是那个互联网的接入率，然后下面的话就是说从一个人力资本角度来讲的话，我们会关注的指标是它多少的家庭持有就是智能电子设备。
Yeah, so with that introduction, basically you can see that things are also improving in terms of the 3 dimensions, but the only thing that is actually lacking is, for example, in Indonesia, you will see that the capital investment is not enough. The same can be said about Philippines and Vietnam, and also, well, Thailand is actually higher, but it's not high enough. Because if you compare, for example, Indonesia, they spend $23 in terms of telecommunications versus 130 in Singapore. And you will say, yeah, but how does that thing affect in the real world? And basically you can think in terms of the quality of services. So if you ever had some sort of communication problem with talking with someone in Philippines, in Indonesia, or maybe in Vietnam, maybe this is the reason behind that. Okay, so this is just one way of understanding how important is the telecommunication infrastructure. And also, if you go beyond that, without any telecommunication infrastructure, how different companies are going to be able to offer digital services, or how you are going to be able to offer like things like digital payment or e-wallets if the telecommunication infrastructure is weak. So those are just 2 or 3 aspects to mention about the importance of this variable in terms of the telecommunication itself.
所以这里面我经常去人的时候去看，就东南亚的就是比如说智能手机渗透率是多少啊，各国家的互联网渗透率是多少啊，又卖了多少智能手机啊，等等等等。然后这里面我们觉得一个比较重要的因素是我们刚才提到的，就是每个国家在电信基础设施上的人均投入。这个里面我们可以发现就是泰国这边做的还可以，但是越南、印尼在菲律宾其实在这方面还是比较不足够的。那这个指标会影响什么呢？这个指标会影响就是各个国家它的就是在一个比较表面的，比如说多少人能有智能电话或者多少张 SIM 卡这个之外的一些，就是说你就这个投入的数据决定了它的服务质量到底是有多好。然后这个对我来说呢，就是亲身感受到，就是当然最近2-3年在比如说菲律宾 之前我们就是很多的服务在菲律宾其实就包括甚至在马尼拉，就本身就是它的质量都是有问题的。然后最近几年出现了一些提升，它的这个投入多少决定了它的基础设施到底会有多好，然后也决定了你说你在这些基础设施上面能够加载什么样的就是数字化的产品跟服务。
Thank you.
我这边有2个问题我看到了，然后我们等一下会就是对这2个问题进行一些解答。I said I saw 2 questions. We'll address them in a bit.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, so this is very quick. So we basically created some sort of combination of different indexes to understand how different regulations affects the prices of digital devices. In this case, actually it's the price of a package of 1 gigabyte of data in different countries. So what you can see here is that there is a negative relationship, right? So if you have a country that is very open in terms of the regulations, you will have basically a price that is actually comparatively lower than in the other countries. So actually that is very interesting, is how the different governments, and this is something that may be obvious for you, but basically the governments may help by promoting liberalization policies in order to improve the competitiveness and the connectivity, and that will actually make the prices to go down of the technology itself. So that is actually quite interesting, and this chart is actually showing that.
这个数据这张图就是表示了就是每个国家在它的就是政策跟法规的自由度跟它的就是数据的就是移动数据的价格方面就是有一个很强的相关性。也就是说你会看到就是它的这个就是就数据的价格，然后也决定了就是别人在就是消费者在数据上的消费嘛，会随着这个国家就是法规的自由度的提升而下降，然后这个里面的就是相关关系还是挺强的。
This is the last slide of this section before moving to the last section of all of them. So I think this is important. This, for example, even if we use as part of our measure of the development of the human capital in terms of the possession of a smartphone, for example, and we saw that it was increasing rapidly in the last 20 years. I think that it is very important to understand that a higher possession of a smartphone or a higher penetration of internet doesn't imply that people is actually ready to move to the next digital age or something like that. It is actually far from that. And you can see that in some cases, some countries, when they are developed, they will skip some sort of technology. So for example, I think that in a country like Indonesia, they skip the technology, the fixed broadband connections toward the satellite connection. So that is important because it implies that people have been using less communications in terms of internet because they basically jump from one technology to the other. So that is actually very interesting. And the same is happening with physical devices. So maybe you didn't have maybe for example, the mobile phones didn't exist before in different countries. So this is why they skip directly to smartphones. And in some cases, the same thing is happening with computers. So in this chart that is showing right here, it's basically showing like, well, how laptop possession is actually very highly correlated with with countries that actually creating different kind of apps. And this is actually very obvious because if you do the same kind of thing with the smartphone, it's not going to be the same. So what do I mean by this is that there are things that are more important than just the penetration of smartphones and internet. Is how you are actually using that digital device in order to be productive. And this chart is actually showing that, is showing how there are certain devices like a laptop can enable people, if they actually know how to use it properly, to create more productive things like apps and, I don't know, companies and businesses. So this is actually showing that.
所以这个里面我们就是想提出的一个点是说，我觉得大家都应该看到，就是每个国家的就是它的智能电话的普及率跟就是这个方面的发展嘛，然后就是尤其是从移动互联网的角度来讲的话，就是智能电话的普及率让大家觉得就是这个整个市场是一片大好。然后我们觉得就这个里面可以再做一些更细化的分析，就是说它的就是比如说它的设备到底是一个什么样的设备，它是怎么样的接入。然后这里面当然了，就是会有一个，就是有些国家就是它没有走，就是桌面互联网这一步，就是大量的民众就是从移动互联网开始，就是直接接触到互联网。然后这边有一张图，我们觉得会比较有意思的是，它把每个国家的，就是说叫什么笔记本电脑的普及率。跟每个国家的，就是说它的就是 APP 的，就是本土的 APP 的产生，这个方面我们会发现会有一个就是很强的相关度。也就是说，你看不同的设备，然后不同的设备的普及跟它的一些变化，会跟这些国家本身的它的一些就是业态的发展，会有一个比较强的相关性。
Thank you. I'm moving on to the next section. That is basically we're going to talk about the financial development. And basically the title basically says that it is hindered by the mediocre state of the human capital. And basically we use different kind of measures such as the LEMs per country or the bank branches per country, bank branches per capita, and after that we basically use that per country, right? We use and also to measure the connectivity, a variable that is related to the reserves of deposits. So that is actually very interesting because you will expect that a country that is very well connected, they will have actually a higher number of deposits in the banks, and all of this is converted per capita. And obviously, in the human capital, the most important variable that relates with the financial sector is the monthly disposable income per household. Well, things have been improving. For example, in Thailand, the number of ATMs moved from 30, this is 30 per capita, to 113. And in the case of Vietnam, from 3 to 24. So things have been going up very fast. You can see that also that the reserves of the deposit money have also increased. Like in Vietnam, it multiplied by, I don't know, by 4 or 5. In Thailand, it multiplied by almost, I don't know, 7 or something like that. And obviously, this is something that we showed before. The monthly disposable income have also increased enormously in the last 15 years. So, for example, in Vietnam, in 2005, the average disposable income, actually this is the median disposable income, it was around 120, and now it's around 400. For example, in Singapore, in 2005, it was 3.5 thousand, and now it's around 6,000, something like that. So things have been improving. Okay.
所以这个里面我们提到就是包括就是一些国家的在金融方面的一个状况，就包括就是从基础设施角度来讲的话，我们会就是我看一个比较直观的就是银行跟那个就是 ATM 的就是分布跟它的密度，然后在那个就是互联互通的角度来讲的话，我们看的是这个国家的就是说存款的一个情况，然后在那个人力资本的这个角度来讲的话，我们看的是就是这个国家的家庭的可支配收入当然就是这个跟人均 GDP 是有分别的。然后我们可以发现，就是说在这些重要的指标里面呢，就是都会有一个比较大的增长尤其是我们看就是在那个就是银行跟 ATM 的分布来的话，在泰国的话已经是一个非常 相对来说比较成熟的一个状况了。然后越南在过去一段时间内也实现了一个7、8倍的增长。然后在那个就是家庭的可支配收入里面，我们也会发现，就是说这里面也会有一个比较高的增长。比如说在越南，就是每个家庭平均，他每个月的就是可支配收入已经从之前的$120提高了大概$400。然后新加坡的话是从$3500提高到了$6000。放松。
Thank you. Actually, let me see. Yeah, so I'm going to skip some slides just to share the most important findings. So one of the things that is very important is, for example, if you compare what we use to measure the connectivity itself, we use a variable that is called reserves of deposit money per capita. And if we compare that with the bank branches, you will see obviously a relationship that is actually very positive. It's like with more bank branches in the country, you are going to be actually be able to improve or to increase the reserves of deposit money. So this is basically what we want, right? This is the output that we want. The desirable output is to increase the level of connectivity or the level of reserves of deposit money, okay? But the interesting thing is that this relationship is not linear. You can see that it's actually decelerating through the, like, while we increase the number of bank branches, the reserve of deposit money increased, but is decelerating. So, and you can also see that in Thailand, they have a lot of bank branches per capita. And that is very interesting because it is actually a number that is higher than Singapore and that is higher than Malaysia, countries that are actually much more developed than Thailand. So what's going on there? So, and the reason is that there are some things that are hindering this. So what could that be? So obviously this is going to be related with the disposable income and also with the level of education. So it is not just a matter of improving the infrastructure and just investing money in infrastructure, right? It is much more than that. You need some time in order to make the people acquainted with all of this. You need some time to people to be educated and to actually to generate enough resources in order to do this. This is why you cannot force the development of a specific sector in such a specific way, such as Thailand. So that is not working, and that is not working anymore for Thailand. So you cannot improve the level of reserve deposit by just increasing the number of infrastructure, the number of banks or ATMs. That is not going to work anymore.
这里面我们看到的是一个，就是说它的银行的，或者是说存款储备跟它银行支行就是人均银行支行数的这样的一个关系，然后可以看到说这样并不是一个直接的线性的关系。在某种程度上之后，就是更多的基础设施其实并没有就是对整个国家的存款储备就是有一个更加正面的作用。然后这里面的一个例子，我看到是泰国的人均的银行跟 ATM 的数量其实是超过新加坡的，但是它在存款储备的这个指数上并没有就是跟新加坡有一个很明显的提升。然后这个我们也进行了一个就比较深入的分析，然后就是结论是其实单纯的基础设施的提升并不能够就是以一己之力能够改变所有的东西，然后这个里面还会受到一些就比如说就是教育水平跟那个收入水平这样的一个限制，所以说只有这几点就是在同时一起提升的时候，我们才会看到一个比较线性的一个变化。
So I'm going to skip some slides just to show you again something that is interesting. For example, we have how the actually let me see. I just want to show you this small chart in the right. you can see that the number of commercial bank branches is increasing, but you can see that that this is not increasing in the high income countries. Actually, this is considering the entire, like this is considering all the countries in the world. And basically you can see that, and this is also something that is pretty obvious, is that in high income countries, the level of the number of bank branches is actually decreasing because they are moving towards a next or a different kind of technology or a different kind of way of doing banking. So this is actually pretty interesting. You can see that in upper middle income countries, that the trend is actually continue to increase, but in high income countries, like a country like Singapore, this is actually decreasing. So this is important because this reinforces the point that is related to Thailand, that basically that you need to improve something else rather than the ATMs and the bank branches in order to improve the levels of banking, the banking penetration, or the reserves of deposit money in banks. So this is a very important point.
这张画面边上我们想指出的就是右下角的这个图，可能看起来比较小啊，你会看到就是在每个国家它的银行的，就是商业银行的网点数量，就是人均商业银行的网点数量，就是在低收入到中高收入的国家里面，这个其实一直是随着这个就是怎么讲呢？收入其实有个提升，或者说有一个线性的提升的。然后在高收入国家里面，它是随着时间的变化，它的商业银行的网点数量，人均的网点数量其实是降低的。这里面可能跟我们就是理解的一些东西可能会有一些偏差，就是我们一直理解的是说，是在一些收入比较低的国家，它可能会直接跳过去就是说通过商业网点而直接就进入到一个就是移动式的不会金融的这样一个东西。但是呢，就是这方面我们其实也看了多方面的数据其实最后的话还是发现就是在数字金融的这个使用程度来讲的话，就是经济发展水平更高的国家，它在数字或者其他渠道的金融使用的转变，还是比一些就是收入相对来说比较中低等的国家更明显。当然，这可能也是一个发展阶段的问题。
So as part of the summary of this presentation, I think it's very interesting to be able to condense all of the variables that we saw in some sort of index. So you can see here in a very quick way the general state of the different countries. So you can see that basically Vietnam is lacking in terms of infrastructure, is lacking in terms of the disposable income, and it's actually lacking in terms of the bank deposit reserves. So that is actually very interesting. And for example, Indonesia, they are still lacking in terms of digital possession of possession of digital devices, even if some services are telling you other things, and they're actually very low in trade per capita. So they are not, Indonesia is still not connected enough in order to improve several things. So Philippines, for example, they have very high level of education, but there are many things that are still lacking. So this is also very interesting. What else can we mention? Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
OK， 这个里面的话，我们把刚才提到的，就是各项指标，其实就都分成每个国家进行了一个指数的指点，这样会作为一个就是对每个国家它的机会、跟它的发展程度、跟它的限制因素都会有一个比较直观的概念。比如说我们刚才一个重点提到的就是包括印尼，大家说印尼的就是互联网就是移动怎么讲呢？就是人口比较多等等，然后就是但是我们看到就是说家庭为单位的话，它的就是数字设备的渗透率其实还不是特别的高。然后第二点的话就是说它的就是在贸易这个角度来讲的话，就是发达程度还是相对比较低的。 这个涉及到因素就是说它整个国家的互联互通，然后这个过程中会带来的一些商业机会，包括面对消费者的机会，也包括一些产业的机会，这个里面可能还是跟中国有点不太一样的。然后然后再打个比方，像菲律宾这种国家，就是它的教育程度是非常高的，但是它在几乎所有的其他的就是基础设施都会比不成熟，这样的话就限制了它一些就受到高等教育的人群能够发挥自己的一些潜力。当然就是这个里面会对大家就是比如说在菲律宾做一些就不管是开展业务也好，不管是就是在那边开拓市场也好，这个方面会有一些思考。Additional point, Alfonso?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, I think let's look at the questions and if they, I mean, 看到这边有2个问题，所以我们现在会对这2个问题进行一个讨论嘛。然后如果大家有更多的问题的话，也欢迎就是在就是右下角的留言区留个言。然后如果你愿意的话，你也可以就是直接打开麦克风，打开摄像头，然后我们可以直接聊一聊。然后I think the first question is this is actually an interesting question. So the company has built sort of 2 original shopping sort of programs for Lazada. So it's similar to what you see in China, the how do you call it, live streaming. How do you even call it, live streaming commerce? So basically when you do the live stream and people will place orders, and he believes that the industry is at its infancy, so live streaming.
Right.
So from our point of view, which country could develop the fastest and has the largest potential in this area, and that's worth us dedicating our resources. And this is Mr. Liu, right? And he also mentioned that they have accumulated some data and experience, so that's from their real experience. So which might differ from what we see from sort of a more foundational and infrastructure point of view. So they want to hear a bit from us about our perspective.
Okay, so how do we address the first one? Well, I think that what they mentioned, or what he mentioned, is it fits what we are actually seeing, right? What is the country with the most potential? Well, how do we address the potential if we are not seeing the competition itself, right? But in terms of the country, and I'm gonna omit Singapore because everything is already there. So I'm gonna say that just Malaysia, because they are high in terms of, they are increasing in terms of development, and things seems to be a bit more regulated or deregulated in Malaysia. But in terms of the potential of the target audience, while, for example, you may think in going to Indonesia because they have a huge population. But the thing is that if you do the math, the population that is actually enabled in order to use your digital services is going to be much more limited. So you need to do the math. So for example, let's say that in Indonesia, the population that is enabled to use that kind of service is going to be maybe less than 1% of the population. But in Malaysia, that percentage is going to be a bit higher, but maybe it's not going to be enough. So let's say that it's going to be 3 or 4% in Malaysia. So maybe when you do the math, it's going to be a very similar number. So this is why in some cases, bigger numbers such as Indonesia with a huge population, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be much more attractive. And I think that, for example, Singapore, a very small country, you can see that it doesn't have any kind of natural resource. Well, they have some oil, yes, that's okay, but that's it. So I think it's very interesting to see how a country can actually expand through try to improve their interactions and connectivity in order to add value to the global economy without any kind of natural resource. So this is what was the economic term? Comparative advantages or something like that. So I think that we shouldn't be like, if someone is thinking in Indonesia, for example, because of the huge population, that is not enough reason to go there. But I would say something a bit less riskier than Indonesia, like Malaysia, because it is a country that is growing, has a higher GDP per capita, has higher infrastructure, has higher human capital. It is better connected. Yeah, I will go with Malaysia. Yeah, that is the first question. Sorry, it was a bit.
No, it's okay. I mean, it was
dispersed.
the first part of the first question anyway. So,
Yeah.
OK， 这里的话，我把就是阿方索的观点翻译一下，然后同时我可能会加一些我自己的观点，然后他会觉得就是从各项数据的角度来讲的话，他会觉得马来西亚会是一个比较有吸引力的市场。这里面一个数据点我们在分析的，就包括我们现在就是正在完成的一个就是关于外卖市场的这样一个报告，我们也会就是对一些切分市场，我也会看说这个市场上面能够有能力消费或者说就是承担这样的一个就是这个类型的服务的人口到底是多少，占这个人口的比例是多少，然后这群人口的他的消费能力是什么样子。就是说把市场就是切分成就是有这个消费能力的人口跟没有这个就是不管从基础设施角度来讲，或者说人力资本来讲，就是没有能力去消费这个服务的人群。他提到的是说，就说直观的，就是从他手上的数据的感觉来讲的话，就是他会觉得马来西亚这个市场可能会是一个比较在这方面比较友好的市场，不管是从人口的教育程度啊，不管是从就是它的就是一个基础设施跟它的就是怎么讲呢，法规上的一个自由度啊，这个我不知道你刚才有没有注意到，就是刚才还有一个数据，就是家庭的数字设备的持有渗透率，这个方面就是在马来西亚的这个就是这个指标，其实我发现是超过新加坡的，然后我们一开始看这个数据的时候，我们自己也觉得很奇怪，因为感觉就是说新加坡就是如果你看就是运营商的数据的话，它的那个就是智能电话渗透率应该是超过100%的。但是我们也知道，就周围很多人他其实是有2台电话，甚至很多小孩子都是有电话的。然后我们后来做了一个调研，就发现就是说新加坡相对于就其他国家有更多的独居的老人，然后这些人就单独组成一个家庭，所以就导致了说，而且对他们来说的话，就很多时候。我们在地面上看到的就是很多人的就是没有智能设备，有智能设备不会用，有智能设备不用，有智能设备不上网，这些都还是挺普遍存在的。然后在马来西亚，因为就是家庭呢，可能就是生活在一起的会比较多，所以说它不会有太多是老人独居的家庭，所以说整个家庭呢就是这一块的渗透率还是比较高的。然后还有一点就是一个消费能力的问题这个方面，在过去的很多年，其实我也跟很多朋友交流过这个事情，就是很多事情做的不大，就是看你从什么角度来讲，就是说，如果从一个就是融资上市的角度，跟一个赚钱的角度是不一样的。很多事情在新加坡就是赚钱还是相对比较容易的。我们也看到新加坡一些就是做零售啊，做一些包括是做超市、做水果店收入还都相当不错。做的相当不错的一些人，就是但是呢，就是在印尼，我们发现就是，能够赚到钱的人，其实做的很多事情是不一样的。就比如说，很少有人，我们到现在都发现很少有人能够从比较互联网的模式，赚到钱。我们最近也看到一些就做比如说做社区电商的，就是在新加坡做，本来是赚钱的，然后。而且有些赚的还不错，然后就是拿到钱了去印尼做，就做的非常辛苦，客单价低，然后做程度低，然后就是管理上的各种各样的问题等等。 所以这个就是具体的问题具体分析嘛，但是我觉得就是我们这边可能比较会看到就是说一套就是分析问题的一个方式嘛，当然了，就是对你们来说的话，就是可能在这过程中会积累一些就是自己尝试的一些数据，这个方面的话，我觉得我们也可以就是单独的去沟通一下嘛，就是看怎么去解读这个数据，怎么把这个数据跟对市场的一些理解能够结合起来，就是说能够找到就是一些东西表现特别好或者表现特别不好的原因到底在哪里。如果这个问题是算回答了吗？还是说你还有更多的就是对这个问题的讨论点？可以打字，可以直接说。谢谢。Okay. So I think I also added a point that we see because of the different objectives, right? I mean, what the objective is to build something like gigantic with lots of like a population looking at the long term, or with you want to do something which is profitable and of course, I mean that would sort of always factor in like your cost of goods sold. I mean your average revenue, average value per customer, and your fulfillment cost, etc., etc. I think let's go to the next question. Oh, okay, that's very specific. I actually don't quite understand this question. It's from Yan. Can you see what you have observed the different countries, different types of agricultural products, the relationship of import and export?
Yeah, well, in this slide, basically, you can see like the most important agricultural and mining products related to different countries. But I don't know if this is actually what you are looking for. So, for example, in terms of production, you will see that Indonesia, and this is obviously something that you may know, Indonesia is one of the most important producers of palm kernel oil. Obviously, everything related to palm oil, palm fruit, palm oil, and also is one of the most important producers of cinnamon, vanilla, and rice, and all that. So maybe this is not what you are looking for, but this is basically are the most agricultural and raw resources produced by country. So you will see that, for example, Vietnam produces pepper, cashew nuts, cinnamon, coffee. This is something that we know. For example, in terms of energy, basically, we have Indonesia, one of the major producers of geothermal energy, coal, and we have Philippines with geothermal energy. That's very cool. For example, in terms of mining resources, you have Indonesia nickel, tin ore, smelter tin, and you will have in Vietnam bismuth, something that I don't know what it is, to be honest. And in Philippines, you will have nickel. So I don't know if this answers your question, but those are the most important agricultural and mining products that are imported, that are actually exported, because they are produced and many of them are actually exported. So there you go.
不知道这个是否回答了你的问题啊？就是说，就是基本上就是这张表就基本上是东南亚各个国家的主要的农产品跟自然资源的一个出口情况，然后还算是比较全面吧，对。Is there any more question? 大家还有什么其他的问题吗？
哎，你好，我这边有一个问题，我不知道您那边可以听到吗？
我可以听到，你说。
对，就是我刚才从您的这个分享里边的话呢，其实看到了很多就是关于最近这些年吧，就是东南亚这边发展的一些情况，可以说是回顾吧。 还有一些分析。就是我也想听听，就是从您团队的角度来看的话，就是对于未来一段时间，东南亚这边发展，就是整个发展的情况，您这边的话是一个什么样的一个看法，或者是一个态度啊？这是一方面。另外的话就是说，从这个莫腾的角度来看的话是。可能在哪些国家、哪些行业是可能会有比较，怎么讲，就是可能更快的一个发展。对，我有这么2个问题，就是对于未来的一个展望，您这边是什么看法？
Okay, so Alfonso, this is something actually we discussed while we're producing this report, right? And so I think Alex rightly pointed out that this report is more of a snapshot of where we are and how things have evolved in the past. And the natural next question is that I mean, from now onwards, what's the future is going to be like? I mean, if you look at the snapshot of now and the journey of the past, that's the first question. And the second question is that I mean, how does that future sort of get how to segment that into sort of different countries and different sectors, and which are areas that have high potential or sort of, and of course, as we always say that, okay, we see the fastest the growth.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just gonna stay in this slide for a minute just to explain that. Is that while things have been increasing very fast during the last 30 years, the growth that is expected for the future is going to continue to be fast, but it's not going to be as fast as before. And this is just the natural way that the economy moves, right? So you're going to reach a point that things are going to be accelerating, but not at the same pace as before. So yes, the thing will continue to improve, but not at the same growth rate as before. So you can see that the GDP basically, well, actually, I don't have here a growth rate here just to show you, but it is actually decelerating. It's like, let's say that it moved from 14% to 6%. So that is important, because it doesn't mean that things are going to grow things are going to increase, but they're not going to be so positive for the future. So at a certain point, things are going to be mature, right? But we are still far enough from that kind of maturity level. Another thing that is important to realize is that, well, there is many naive people that believe that growth, it is the most important thing. And from my point of view, if you want to actually make a business, the most important thing is actually something related to if the market is developed enough in order to sustain your product, yes or no, regardless of the growth. Because the growth, well, for example, in countries that doesn't exist anything, you will come with your product and your growth is going to be super high, right? It's going to be super high. It can actually, because it will move from 0 to something, right? And that growth is impressive, but it doesn't mean that is something comparable and that is that has some sort of comparable mean when you compare different countries. So with this thing in mind, you will see that usually the countries that are have the lower GDP per capita are going to be the ones that are going to grow faster in the future. So you will see countries like Vietnam, for example. Those countries are going to grow faster than the rest. You will see that. Obviously, also we omitted the rest of the countries, but countries like Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia, those are going to grow super fast because there is nothing there. So there is a opportunity to penetrate the market, not with digital technology and with very sophisticated product, but offering the basics. The basics are going to be enough in order to do a nice business. You cannot offer things that are going to be very expensive or something like that in countries that are still, that doesn't have enough resources to pay for that, right? Families are still poor in those countries. So you need to offer something that is actually aligned with that kind of macroeconomic environment. So we have two things there. So the region is going to continue to increase, but not at the same rate. So that is one fact. The other thing is that countries that have a lower GDP per capita is going to grow faster, but that is just natural, okay? And And now the third thing is where things are actually going. It's like, okay, how the different governments are actually reacting towards regulation. So as we talked before, regulation is something that will regulate the flow of the resources. So are these countries moving toward higher regulation or deregulation? And as we have seen actually in different countries, every country is moving towards their regulation. And actually you can see that in China too, many countries are, many regions are actually moving towards the deregulation. So I think that is something that is going to actually expand more in Southeast Asia, and that should actually accelerate the rate of many things in the region. Basically, that should improve the flow of businesses and basically the resources and infrastructure and all of that, because that is basically what improves the connectivity and the competitiveness of the region. So that is another point that is very important, is that countries are moving towards their regulation. So that is something that is very cool. Okay, and the last question that I think is the most complicated one, that is about the sectors. Actually, I don't know if I have enough information to answer this question, Yangan, because we don't have a split of the different sectors in order to see which one is going to be the most important it's going to have the fastest growth, right? But it's the same logic as before. If you have a country that doesn't have any technology, that sector is going to increase in a super fast way, but it doesn't mean that is enough in order to sustain your business. And this is how we connected with the question before about the streaming service, that maybe it is growing fast, but it is a nascent stage yet. So yeah, the growth rate is going to be high in all of those sectors that are missing because because there is nothing there. But it doesn't mean that they are going to be able to sustain a very sophisticated business in those sectors.
Yeah, so 我觉得你应该听懂了嘛，但是我把它就简单总结一下，然后再加一些我自己的观点嘛，就是第一点提到的是说，就是不管从 GDP 还是从各个角度来讲的话，它的整体的就经济的发展其实是增速是处于一个放慢的角度。然后这方面其实我也看了很多第三方的，包括一些银行，包括一些国际机构的一些报告。然后就是基本上是从经济增长速度来讲的话，可能最快的除了一些小国家，比如说什么老挝啊、柬埔寨这种小国家之外，就主要的国家里面经济发展最快的越南跟菲律宾，但是这个也很自然嘛，因为就是从人均 GDP 的角度来讲的话，越南跟菲律宾基本上是处于印尼的55%到60%的一个水平那这样的话，其实你算一下，就是它如果以就是比较乐观的估计，就是一年7%的速度增长的话，其实到2030年，它可能也就是比印尼现在的水平稍微高一点点。所以而且这个过程中还不排除就是发生一些意外情况，导致它的增长失速。所以这个里面其实蛮考验这些国家政府，就是说怎么样进一步的就是改善它的政策法规环境，怎么样进一步就提升它的就是人力资源，怎么样就第一步提升它的基础设施。因为我们目前发现就是这几点都是就刚才用的那个水坝的那个比喻嘛，就是都会其实运作的好的话会进一步释放一些增长的潜能。但是其实有一点就是我个人跟一些就是经常就从中国过来在东南亚的朋友一直讨论那个问题，就是东南亚的这些国家在工业化的这个发展水平上会不会达到中国现在这样的一个角度？但是我跟我朋友这边的一些想法都是觉得在工业化这边的话，就是能够达到中国这样的产业链，其实相对来说还是比较困难的，可能只是说产业链方面的一部分。这样的话对整个政治的空间也好，对整个就是就业市场都会有一些影响。还有一个提到的问题就是很多时候就我们在过去的5-6年看到东南亚的很多就是互联网公司，很多创业公司都是有这样的问题，就是你刚开始做的时候一开始的发展特别快，甚至有些就是说 每周的增长200%这种就能够持续若干个月，但是到一定程度就发现再往上走，就好像到了一个天花板，好像到了一个就是你怎么分析也分析不出来一个天花板，就数据就涨不快了，就不管你怎么做都涨不快。这里面有几个原因，就是第一个原因可能是，就是整体的，就是说这边人才对一个问题的思考，尤其是在互联网这一块的话，它这个运营理念的话，我觉得就是跟国内或者跟美国其实差别还是有点大的，就是有些东西出了问题之后，或者说增长增速之后增长失速之后，它并不能以一个就是很灵活的方式举一反三的去应对去改变这个问题。很简单一个例子 ，Shopee 跟拉扎达的比较，因为我之前在 Rocket Internet 待了2年，当时就是拉扎达是我们的就是姊妹公司嘛，然后 Shopee 的就是现在的 CEO 那个 Chris， 他当时也在拉扎达，所以当时大家都是比较熟的朋友，就是他会发现，你会发现就到一定程度，就是它增长，就是一开始高速增长，大家都很开心，然后就是像拉扎达，包括是比如说在印尼目前看的一些比较热门的公司，但到一定程度，你发现它的增长曲线变得很平，在这个过程中你怎么去应对这样一个东西？我发现就是大部分人他的这个理念还是说，你增长不动的时候，你会更努力的去推它的增长，而不是说想想就是发生什么样的问题，怎么样去改变自己的产品，怎么样去改变自己的分销模式，怎么样去做成一个就是真正的类似于国内那种不管是 growth hacking 也好，不管是叫增长运营也好，这个方面我觉得这里面还是缺一点。第二个的话，就是很多时候还是真的是受到一些基础设施的一些限制。打个比方，我刚才说的比较多的就是人具体在大城市里面这个包括包括去年印尼那些就是几个大的电子钱包嘛，像 Grab 跟那个 Tokopedia 的 offer， 包括就是蚂蚁投资的 Dana， 包括包括郭谢的 GoPay， 就是去年都会在一定程度上就是出现了一个增长的瓶颈，就发现特大城市之外的人群并没有那么好渗透，然后这两年也冒出了很多模式，就是不管是通过就是夫妻老婆店啊，不管是通过就地面的一些分销渠道，不管是通过物流啊，去试图解决这样的问题。我觉得都值得观察嘛，就是但是一个基本的点就是说，很多时候它的就是这个市场上的 friction 还是蛮大的，就是说很多东西你真的不到地面上去，你会不知道就是你东西为什么一开始涨得好好的，突然到了一个瓶颈不动了。当然这些问题有些是能够解决，有些是相当困难的。所以其实具体还是具体问题具体分析，但是大方面的东西嘛，就比如说零售多少会往电商方面转，然后这过程带来的一些生态系统的机会，然后这些机会中的哪一些能够变成赚钱的机会等等，我觉得这个里面就是具体到，就还有一个刚才提到就是农产品这个农产品就比如说印尼棕榈油这个方面是个非常非常大的行业。这个行业里面是不是有一些就是通过互联网或者通过技术，哪怕是通过技术提供金融方案的这些东西，这个里面我觉得都是有空间的。但是就是真的是要具体问题具体分析，因为每一个行业它发展到现在，它的复杂程度都是不一样的。So I went a bit complicated, just a bit of experience looking at different sectors and
yeah, thank you.
And a typical issue we see with lots of internet companies in Southeast Asia is super high growth in the beginning after Series B, and then sort of growth plateaued, and a typical approach I see with lots of people when this happens is to push faster. But of course, I mean, when you push faster, it doesn't really solve the problem, and some of the problems can be resolved. It requires a bit of tweaking of business model or changing the distribution, whatever. But some of these are fundamental. But overall, the friction is quite high in many things that you do, especially when you go sort of from pure offline to offline or online and offline, and also revamping the existing infrastructure.
Right.
Hello, Jiangan.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
All right. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sure. So we know that China has slowed down in terms of the GDP growth over the past decade, as any country. But if we look one level deeper into that, the old economies GDP has been slowing down, but the new economy's GDP growth has always been increasing, right? Even though the overall slowdown from like 15% to 12% to now 6%, the new economy is always increasing. So I wonder whether you think that similar trend is now happening in Southeast Asia. And if we take, that's the first question. And second question, if we take into account the two dimensions, one is market attractiveness, the other one is competitiveness, which will be the top three sub-segment that you'd say presents the best opportunity for early stage investments, right? From a VC perspective, would B2C or B2B, and B2B, I guess we can divide into big B, which is enterprise sales, to small Bs, so things like Warungs and so on. Like between those, which one presents a better opportunity in Southeast Asia, and in what verticals, right? Fintech, edutech, health tech, and whatnot. Do you think, in your perspective, the top three?
It needs to be tech. Okay. So
something scalable, right?
Okay. So for the first question is basically the comparison of the old and new countries and all that. So I just want to contextualize this a bit, is that this is happening. You can see this kind of high growth in new countries, whatever is that, is because basically they are moving towards heavy industrialization, right? And this is something that happened very, like, it happened in the 60s in Singapore, and it happened a bit later in the rest of the countries of Southeast Asia. And well, in China also, this happened very late. But if you compare to the old countries, the Industrial Revolution happened maybe about 200 years ago or 150 years ago. This is why those countries were they were growing very fast about 150 years, but now they are in a maturity stage because there is nothing else that they can do there. But it doesn't mean that, well, this is why all of those countries have a super high GDP per capita. Well, in the case of Singapore, well, there is some sort of synergy in Singapore that is able to grow very fast. And I suppose that is because it's very small, it's very manageable, something like that may create some sort of synergy that makes it develop further and in a very fast way. They don't need 200 years in order to be very, very well developed, you know? So that is just the comparison of the new versus old, but but the thing is that I
think let me clarify. When I say new economy versus old economy, right? We are actually talking about like two sub-segments within the same country. We are not talking about new economy as an economy referring to a substitute word for a country. Take China, for example. Within China, old economy growth is slowing down. So things like retail, traditional manufacturing, so on and so forth, slow down. But new economy within China, that sub-segment has always been growing with the increasing speed.
Right, yeah.
Whether you see that same thing happening now in Southeast Asia.
Okay, yeah, now I get more your focus in tech things. So, well, this is also related to the answer that I gave to the previous participant, right? In Southeast Asia, things are not very well developed, you know, especially all of those sophisticated sectors. So all of them have super high potential to grow. But the thing is that they're not going to be able to go. They will grow fast, but they will reach a cap very soon. Okay, so for example, if you make a company and you sell something like, I don't know, something with internet, you sell digital lending, you will begin very, very good maybe in your first month, but after that you are going to stop. You're going to stop increasing your demand because you already reached the entire potential. So that is the main problem here, is that you're not going to have you're not going to have a sustainable demand in Southeast Asia. So you're going to lack transactions because it's not enabled enough. Okay, So, for example, this is something that many companies are struggling right now. And I'm not talking about small companies, I'm talking about the big ones, okay? So all of them that have digital services, super apps and similar, they are struggling with that because they are not able to find enough demand in order to sustain their businesses. This is why they are actually diversifying into other services. So they will have digital wallet, they will have, I don't know, ride hailing, they will have, I don't know, food delivery, they will have many things. And why they're doing that? It's not because they are super ambitious, it's because they need it. They need it. They need that kind of revenue. They need kind of new stream of revenue in order to make the business sustainable. So that is one thing. So things are growing fast, but the thing, maybe that is not enough in order to sustain your business. So that is the main problem. And that is why many companies are dying too. Yangan, maybe you want to say something else.
Sorry, I was muted. I think just relating to the to the food delivery report Alphonse is finalizing, which will be released in about 1 or 2 weeks time. I mean, so many people look at, okay, food. I mean, how much people consume on food, etc., etc. But we look at, I mean, subsector of food services, and how big is the sector? How has that sector been growing? What's the average ticket size? What's the sort of cost structure? And how can you sort of I mean, if you want to build a business, what kind of density do you need? What kind of cost structure that you need to sustain, so that it actually makes sense. I think also when you talk about old economy versus new economy, taking this COVID as an example, so people often say that, okay, in Southeast Asia, the old economy did not really have the urge to do something new, to do whatever, and many of the efforts by, say, the big groups in Thailand, even the generals in Thailand, and the sort of the families in Indonesia, etc. Many of the sort of new economy stuff that they did were highly experimental. And for some of them, of course, we can blame some of them for being slow, but for many of them, the sense is that, okay, I know a few people that have this mentality that, okay, I have a new economy business in my hand. I don't need to go really well, but I know how it is. So just in case the other players become big enough to disrupt me, I know how to respond. But there's no point for me to burn money together with them. So, but there are changes because of COVID, right? I mean, sort of. I know retail bosses last year who would refuse to go to do any sort of e-commerce because they said it's not necessary. But many of them I know nowadays, they're on Shopee, they're on Lazada, and they're paying for Shopify. So quite often I think things only change when people are forced to change, when circumstances force them to do so. And I think in the case of China, when the new economy is developing, that creates a sort of a spiral, right? I mean, because the people in the old economy find it no longer competitive, and they move towards an economy that pushes the growth of the new economy. So at the end of the day, I think you attended our last seminar with Cento, which we talk about the sort of investment in Southeast Asia, right? And if you remember, we didn't use e-commerce, we used retail as a category. So because e-commerce, or social commerce or whatever is different ways for you to do retail and with different distribution channel. But at the end of the day, retail as a whole is growing, right? So you look at, I mean, how do you slice the market? 我不知道是不是要用中文重复一遍啊，就是很简单的，就是关于就是问题是说，在中国的就是说新经济是一直增长的，旧经济是一直下降的，在东南亚是否看到同样的趋势？然后我们这里有一个感觉就是说，就是在很多时候就是说旧经济的话，它如果没有这样一个就是外界的逼迫的话，如果它是赚得好好的，如果它的利润没有下降的话，它是没有这个动力去采纳新的东西的，往往采纳新的东西，就包括我今天早上的时候跟我一个国内刚刚融资的一个 AI 朋友聊这个事情也是说嘛，就是如果我的业务是好好的，我没有 动力去做 AI，我做 AI 更多的是探索性的。真正的就是 all in AI 的是我的业务受到了影响，我必须得找一个突破口，不然的话我就没法活了。所以我觉得是说，在东南亚的话，就比如说今年的这个就是疫情，这是一个变量。就是我刚才说过了，是我认识很多，做零售的朋友嘛，就去年就是一直到去年底的时候，他们就是提到电商啊，没时间啊，这个要投入，就是反正就是不想搞。但今年的话，很多人就老字号上面开店，Shopee 上面开店，然后 Shopify 也变成了付费用户，所以说，会有一些外在的因素带来一些变化。我觉得这些都需要就是具体的、辩证的、长期的去看、去分析。大的趋势是，就比如说电商是零售的一部分，大的趋势是随着经济的发展，零售整体上是在往上涨的。然后电商的增长，当然它可能零售整体的增长没那么快，然后就电商或者说社交电商更多的是抢的是一个在整个零售里面的一个占有率啊。这个到每个问题，我觉得可能都需要一个具体的分析，但是整体上我觉得就是东南亚的势能跟中国其实还是挺不一样的，这个需要细化的，就是每个 sector 去自己的分析。Okay, I think we are out of time. It's already 6:12, so it's Friday night. So I think Doshi, do you have anything else to add, or should we just let everyone go and enjoy the dinner on Friday?
就如果大家没有更多的新的问题的话，我们可能就今天的分享会可能就到此结束了。看大家还有没有一些新的问题啊？好的，那这次就非常感谢大家，就是来抽空啊，在这种快要过周末的时候的周五的周末最后一天，这边来参加莫腾的举办这个分享会。以后莫腾可能我们还会举办一些不定时的举办一些小型的这种研讨会啊，跟大家一起来交流。就是也欢迎大家多转发我们的文章，给我们点赞，然后呢就多留言，然后也可以跟我们互动一下，就是你们这些一些交流，包括对我们的建议，就是也是推动我们莫腾向前走的这样一股动力。非常感谢大家。然后如果对于报告包括这个录屏有需求的话，就请在微信后台留言，或者是直接发到我们这个发邮件给我们，然后我们到时候会直接发给您，就还有包括我们的相关的一些报告对，非常谢谢。
好，谢谢大家，周末愉快。Have a good weekend, guys. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.